The VTC meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is reports of the Secretary General on the Sudan and South Sudan. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of Ethiopia and the Sudan to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in this meeting. Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, and Mr. Parfait Ananga, Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Horn of Africa. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of Council members to document S/2020/308, the report of the Secretary General on this situation in Abyei. And I give the floor to Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and distinguished Council members. I thank you for this opportunity to brief the Security Council on the developments pertaining to the UN's Interim Security Force for Abyei, UNISFA, including its support to the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism, JBVMM. I shall also update you on recent developments since its publication. Mr. President, despite the improving relations between Sudan and South Sudan, it remains very unlikely that progress will be made in determining the final status of the Abyei area in the short to medium term. Given that the African Union Commission and the AU High-Level Implementation Panel are stretched dealing with other priorities, the enhancement of the UN support to the AU through the appointment of a deputy head of mission for UNISFA becomes more important, while the Special Envoy works with the AU to seek ways to revitalize the political process. In this regard, in a positive development, on the 4th of March, UNISFA held consultations with Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok of Sudan to resolve the issues of the Attorney airstrip and the appointment of the Deputy Head of Mission. The Prime Minister has expressed willingness to support the mission in these areas. Mr. President, at the local level, the security situation in the Abyei area remains volatile, with episodes of heightened tensions between the Ngok Dinka and the Miseria communities, an increase in criminality, and the presence of armed elements in UNISFA's area of responsibility. UNISFA strove to contain insecurity and to keep the Abyei area a weapons-free zone through rapid response and presence in sensitive areas. However, the movement of armed men reported by the local population on several occasions during the reporting period remained a source of concern. UNISFA troops have also been subject to attacks by armed elements. In the latest incident on the 24th of April in Sector Center, UNISFA forces challenged an armed Miseria herdsman in Nainai who fired upon them. In a separate incident in the same day, also in Sector Center, a Miseria armed group with automatic assault rifles engaged with UNISFA troops at the Alal post. Regarding the major escalation of violence between communities on the 19th of January 2020, in which 3 Miseria were killed at Nainai by attackers suspected to be Ngok Dinka, and on the 22nd of January 2020, when 33 Ngok Dinka were killed by Miseria armed elements at Kolom, in what is believed to be a retaliatory attack, UNISFA established a joint investigative team to conduct a preliminary investigation into the incident in the aftermath of the attack. Tensions, which had rapidly escalated, are now slowly easing thanks to the preventive deployments and engagement of the mission with the local communities. On the 16th of March, a traditional leaders conference comprising both Ngok Dinka and Miseria paramount chiefs took place in Difra, Sector North. The two sides acknowledged the need for peace and agreed not to escalate the situation. A follow-up meeting with the two paramount chiefs took place in Difra on the 9th of April. While no agreement has yet been reached on the southern migration of Miseria herders for the forthcoming dry season, These meetings managed to bring together the traditional leaders of the two sides for the first time since the Colombe attacks in January 2020. There were also the first meetings in that format since November 2017, when the leaders met in Addis Ababa during an Abyei Joint Oversight Committee (AJOC) meeting. Although still insufficient to restore stability to the area, these are encouraging steps taken by the two communities. Our paramount concern is to sustain the positive dialogue restored between the two communities. Following the completion of the Colombe investigation report by the mission, I will be discussing with the force commander what other steps may be undertaken to prevent the repetition of such incidents in the future. In other developments, the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism, JBVMM, made some progress towards reaching the benchmark specified by UN Security Council Resolution 2497. Clear guidance for the JBVMM operational activities was provided in the outcome document of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism, JPSM, ordinary session in Juba on the 19th of February 2020. Both parties have now fully deployed a complete number of national monitors as per the agreement. Freedom of movement for aerial and ground monitoring missions was also fully guaranteed. The team site at Abukusa/Wonko was then successfully established on the 13th of January 2020. Mr. President, with respect to the current police generation process, the deployment of the 3 authorized FPUs expected to be on the ground by July 2020 is facing serious delays due to the travel restrictions decided by the government of Sudan to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. The process for deployment of the first identified FPU from Ethiopia was well advanced by early March, with the completion of the pre-deployment visit to the mission area. However, all further steps had to be suspended in view of the COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. Although no cases of COVID-19 have been recorded in UNISFA, the UNISFA COVID task force medical teams are visiting all team sites and sectors to verify the state of preparedness in the mission. Engineering work has been completed to establish a 16-bed quarantine area for uniformed personnel. I welcome the Prime Minister's assurance that he will soon put a team together to conduct the necessary consultations with the Ministry of Defense and Intelligence for the use of the Abyei airstrip. The use of that airstrip would significantly improve UNISFA's medevac capability and address its current logistical challenges. At the local level and on a daily basis, UNISFA conducts sensitization with a large section of interlocutors, including civil society, women's associations, communities coming to the different marketplaces, and dedicated meetings with paramount chiefs, judges, and prosecutors to encourage hand-washing and social distancing. As a result of the discussions in detention centers, the Chief Criminal Court decided to release 13 detainees convicted on petty crimes to help decongest the cells and to comply with the WHO guidelines on social distancing. Agencies are also in discussions with local administration on requirements for screening sites in several locations of the Abyei area. While months ahead will no doubt pose new unprecedented challenges as we grapple with COVID-19 pandemic, UNISFA leadership will continue to engage with the governments of the Sudan and South Sudan to facilitate the implementation of the pending aspects of their previous agreements and the UNISFA mandate. UNISFA will also continue to play a stabilizing role in the Abyei area and along the border regions. I would thus seek the continued support of the Security Council for the Secretary General's recommendation to extend the mandate of UNISFA for a further period of 6 months until the 15th of October 2020. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Lacroix for his briefing. I now give the floor to Mr. Parfait Ananga. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for the opportunity to once more brief the Security Council on progress in the implementation of Resolution 2046, which concerns outstanding bilateral issues between Sudan and South Sudan and the conflict in South Kordofan and Blue Nile states. This briefing is taking place at a time when the world community is facing a deadly global pandemic in the form of COVID-19. In Sudan and South Sudan, the COVID-19 pandemic has wide-ranging health, human, and socio-economic implications, compounded by plummeting oil prices, a desert locust invasion, and climatic vagaries. Allow me, Mr. President, to echo the multiple calls of the Secretary General in favor of the countries of the region, including those on today's agenda, in view of the unfolding dire socio-economic impact that affect them. I am particularly worried by the exponential increase in the number of COVID-related deaths in Sudan. Urgent external support will be needed to buttress the response to this unprecedented challenge. The pandemic will also likely have a negative effect on the peace processes in the two countries, including by significantly slowing down engagements. My office is currently coordinating a UN-wide technical support to enable IGAD Secretariat to formulate a regional strategy and develop an action plan in response to the pandemic pursuant to the decisions of the IGAD Virtual Summit meeting of 30th of March, chaired by Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Mr. President, since my last report to the Council in October 2019, I have had opportunities to engage with authorities in Sudan and South Sudan, as well as with regional actors. My joint visits with Under-Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix to Abyei last February, in the aftermath of the tragic column incident, was part of this effort. And undeniably, both countries have been consolidating their improved relations, notably by the constructive roles played in each other's peace process. In this regard, South Sudan has continued to host and facilitate the Sudanese peace process under the aegis of President Salva Kiir. Conversely, the government of Sudan's mediation contributed to compromise between President Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar that led to the formation of the revitalized Transitional Government of National Unity on 12 March 2020. These commendable efforts do not in any way diminish the tremendous diplomatic push by other regional actors, including by South Africa. Furthermore, having inherited the South Sudan file as a new IGAD chairperson at a time when the opposition and the incumbent government were deadlocked on a number of boundaries of states, Prime Minister Hamdok, alongside his co-guarantor, President Museveni of Uganda, is credited for having helped resolve the issue by encouraging President Kiir on the sidelines of the AU summit in early February to return South Sudan to 10 states. Prime Minister Hamdok thereafter congratulated the South Sudanese leader on the courageous decision he took on 15 February, which exposed the IGAD position, demonstrating the changed spirit of the relationship between the two countries. President Kiir strongly condemned the assassination attempt on Prime Minister Hamdok in Khartoum on 9th March. In the same vein, while guaranteeing the security of Dr. Machar in Khartoum, Sudan ensured that General Hemeti accompanied him to and from Juba for consultations, including during his face-to-face meetings with President Kiir between September 2019 and February 2020. The strength of the improved relationship between the two countries was put to the test by two sad developments. The first was a deadly armed attack, just referred to by USG Lacroix, perpetrated by Miseria headsmen in the Colombe locality of Abyei on 22nd January against a community of Ngok Dika. and the second was the sudden death by natural cause on 25th of March in Juba of the Sudanese Minister of Defense, late General Gamal al-Din Omar, after jointly chairing the meeting of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism with his South Sudanese counterparts. Ultimately, the emphasis put by both parties to deepen their cooperation and support each other's stability and peace is very commendable. Mr. President, in Sudan, where Prime Minister Hamdok is leading a challenging transition, his attention is largely directed at diffusing tensions and finding consensus between political players in Khartoum, including on issues resulting from the increasingly dire economic situation. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister is also seeking to deliver on his commitment to peace through negotiations with the armed movements. In this regard, the recent statement by General Al-Burhan, the President of the Sovereign Council, on the unity of the leadership of the transition is very encouraging. In South Sudan, President Kiir and First Vice President Riek Machar are striving to reestablish a partnership that has twice shown its limits, whilst doing everything possible to overcome the political stalemate on the sharing of states and allocation of governors. Otherwise, cooperation in oil management between the two countries has continued to remain strong after a decision to extend the agreement on oil beyond its December 2019 deadline to March 2020. South Sudan has been steadily making payments relating to the transitional financial arrangements by providing Sudan with 28,000 barrels of oil per day. Out of the initial amount due of $3 billion or two, South Sudan now owes approximately $500 million and will continue to use the facilities based in Sudan and export its oil through Port Sudan against payment of a fixed processing, transit, and transportation fee. The effect of the drastic fall in oil prices this month on this cooperation has yet to become clear. Mr. President, as more Sudanese armed opposition movements settle for President Kiir's facilitation of their negotiations with Khartoum, and with the possibility of moving them to a third country ruled out, the talks resumed in Juba in January and are ongoing. Since the outbreak of COVID-19, the talks have proceeded in a virtual format. Prime Minister Hamdok remains open to discuss all issues and the root causes of Sudan's many conflicts in the hope of reaching an agreement that unites all Sudanese. Encouragingly, opposition movements have also restated their irreversible determination to achieve peace. Crucially, despite disagreements between the parties on issues such as secularism, autonomy, and self-determination, which have resulted in several extensions to the initial deadline for concluding the talks, significant progress has been achieved globally, as evidenced inter alia by the renewed commitment to unilateral ceasefires by armed movements. At the behest of President Kiir, the South Sudanese lead mediator traveled occasionally to Khartoum to brief Sudanese authorities on progress in the peace process. The talks are now scheduled to end on May 9th, but it remains to be seen whether this deadline will be met under the current circumstances. So far, the government has signed framework agreements with the SPLM North, Agar, and as well as with armed movements from Darfur and Eastern Sudan. The agreements address the key concerns pertaining to marginalization, lack of development, and participation in governance institutions. However, they do not completely address the issue of separation between religion and the state, which SPLM North, Agar, sees as critical. The next negotiation phases will be concerned with the security arrangements and participation in transitional institutions. Negotiations with Darfuri armed movement deliver a major outcome as agreement was reached with the government on February 11 to establish a special court for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Darfur and to seek justice through the ICC. Notwithstanding progress on the Darfur track, the absence from the talks of the Sudan Liberation Movement of Abdel Wahid al-Nur is a source of grave concern. Similarly, talks with SPLM North at Hilu do not appear to have made any headway. Although present in Juba, Abdelaziz Aliru has refused to engage with the government unless it agrees to a secular Sudan and self-determination for Southern Kordofan and Blue Nile states. The government's position is that these issues should be addressed by the Constitutional Conference and not through the negotiations in Juba. A joint committee on reforms established on April 6 has been mandated to, inter alia, meet with Halilu in a bid to break this impasse. Mr. President, despite their support to each other, Sudan and South Sudan have had minimal bilateral engagements within the framework of their cooperation agreements, but continued to focus on their internal conflicts. However, they have stopped accusing each other of supporting or hosting their respective rebels. Instead, they are mutually reinforcing each other's efforts to end internal conflicts. While both countries are careful to avoid dealing with any points of conflict amid the challenges of their respective transitions and COVID-19, it is hoped that the rapprochement and consolidated relations will subsequently provide the incentive for them to address the outstanding issues under the cooperation agreements, including the situation in Abyei. In this regard, the announcement on 23rd January by President Kiir and General Emeti of the establishment of a joint mechanism to protect civilians and to deploy the deployment of a disengagement force to the area, as well as the establishment of a committee to investigate the Kolom incident, are all positive steps. It is hoped that these issues will feature on the agenda of the next joint political and security mechanism session in Khartoum, which was postponed to an unspecified date due to concerns over COVID-19 and the sudden death of the Sudanese defense minister in Juba. Regarding the two areas, Prime Minister Hamdok's visit to the locality on January 9th and his openness to discuss all issues have raised hope that conflict there may soon be a thing of the past. However, the wrangling between the two SPLM North factions must cease, and forward movement is required on the negotiation track involving SPLM North Halilu. At my meeting with President Kiir on 17 January, I congratulated him on his mediation of the Sudanese peace process, which was beginning to achieve concrete results, and stressed the importance of sustained engagement with Sudanese authorities on various bilateral issues. The President agreed and assured me that once peace is achieved in both countries, they would be in a better position to discuss outstanding issues in view of a mutually beneficial relationship. The foreign minister advised then that the two countries would also prioritize reconciliation in Abyei for now. Accordingly, during the meetings with Mr. Ngok Dika's communities in Abyei on 12 and 13 February in the company of USG Lacroix, I stress on reconciliation and peaceful coexistence. My office will continue, Mr. President, to engage with the authorities of both countries and, as appropriate, with all key regional actors, including the African Union and IGAD, to encourage them not only to consolidate peace and stability within the territories, but also to advance the implementation of all binding cooperation agreements. I thank you, Mr. President, for your attention.
I thank Mr. Ananga for his briefing. I shall now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. According to our speakers list, I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President, and good morning to all colleagues. And thank you, Undersecretary General Lacroix and Special Envoy Parfait, for your briefing, as well as for your joint visit to Abyei in February. We commend UNISFA's activities in Abyei during this difficult period with the COVID-19 pandemic, including its vital support to local peace and protection committees, as noted in the Secretary General's April 16th report. The United States recognizes Ethiopia's leadership, and we welcome the ambassador today in supporting UNISFA, as well as some positive steps that Sudan and South Sudan have undertaken to address insecurity in Abyei, such as the joint security monitoring. And we welcome the ambassador to Sudan here today as well. However, despite these steps, the United States is concerned about the recent violence in Abyei, as was outlined. In January, attacks in the area of Kaloum led to the killing of more than 30 civilians. In mid-April, there was an armed attack on Mabok village, and this violence, the brunt of which has been borne by women and children, is unacceptable. Perhaps most troubling, though, is it demonstrates the lack of political progress by Sudan and South Sudan in resolving outstanding border issues. The people of Abyei and along the border between Sudan and South Sudan deserve better. This violence should serve as a call to action for Sudan and South Sudan. Their leaders should capitalize on the improving relationship and agree on the implementation of arrangements for security and the administration of Abyei. This council has repeatedly mandated a reconfiguration of UNISFA to address current security dynamics. Today, we call on all the parties to remove obstacles preventing UNISFA from realizing its mandate. Moving forward, the United States encourages senior UN officials to redouble their efforts with the parties and with the African Union to allow UNISFA's mandate to be fully implemented. Further, we urge them to push for progress in establishing joint security and administrative arrangements. The participation of women is absolutely critical in these discussions. Especially in these challenging times, the United States remains committed to peace and security in Abyei and across the region. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France. Your mic. And
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Can you hear me? Yes, okay. Mr. President, I would like also to thank USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Parfait Ananga for very informative briefings. I will be brief and limit my remarks to 3 points. First, France condemns in the strongest terms the escalation of intercommunal violence and recent violent clashes in Kaloum. I would like to highlight our deepest concerns over reports of sexual violence affecting women and children and internal displacements in this context. We call on both the governments of Sudan and of South Sudan to coordinate an investigation as announced, and we recall that those responsible must be held accountable and brought to justice. These terrible events confirm that the situation in Abyei is still fragile and that the deployment of UNISFA is still highly needed. Mr. President, however, and it's my second point, only a true political process to address the issue of Abyei and of the border demarcation can really stabilize the security in Abyei. France calls on both governments of Sudan and South Sudan to seize the opportunity of the improvement of their bilateral relations, to tackle the Abyei issue, and to launch a serious dialogue to achieve a political solution in accordance with the 2011 agreement. We welcome the progress in the peace processes in both countries, as reported by Special Envoy Parfait Ananga, and we encourage all armed groups in Darfur to join the negotiations. France also encourages the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, and the UN Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa to intensify their mediation roles in regard to achieving a political solution in accordance with the 2011 agreement between Sudan and South Sudan. We should all do our best to avoid that the situation in Abyei becomes a new frozen conflict and UNISFA an open-ended mission. As the Secretary General wrote in his last report, the international community cannot accept nor afford it. Mr. President, my last remark regards the reconfiguration of UNISFA, as decided by this Council. We deeply regret that the three formed police units, FPUs, are still pending deployment, and we call on both governments to provide full support to UNISFA in the deployment of its personnel, including through issuing the requested visas. The three FPUs must be deployed as soon as possible. It's the only way to deal with the high level of criminality in Abyei and to adapt the force to the current challenges. At the same time, both parties should engage to implement the Abyei police service in line with the 2011 agreement. Lastly, France urges the United Nations and all the stakeholders to do their best to deploy the Deputy Civilian Head of Mission and the civilian team. UNISFA must be able to support the peace process, including at the communal level, and to engage with the African Union and the relevant stakeholders in Juba and in Khartoum. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of France for her statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Indonesia.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would like, first of all, to thank USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Ananga for their important briefings. Indonesia commends the positive engagement between Sudan and South Sudan, as well as their respective transition, and hopes for its continuation in Abyei. However, the fragile security situation in Abyei remains concerning. Unless checked effectively, it could exacerbate the existing socio-economic and humanitarian challenges. This is especially perilous amid the looming COVID-19 pandemic. We hope that the current grave situation will be used by both governments to intensify peacemaking and put all energies behind ensuring that the effects of the pandemic on the people of Abyei and those within their domain are minimized. On this note, I would like to underline three key issues. First, enhancing UNISFA's capacity. UNISFA's presence remains essential to maintaining stability in Abyei. Thus, enhancing UNISFA's ability in fulfilling its full mandate remains our utmost priority. UNISFA's reconfiguration must be geared to enable the mission effectively responding to the challenges on the ground and match them with appropriate personnel and capability support. This is especially important to UNISFA's readiness to COVID-19 pandemic. Indonesia supports the Secretary General's recommendation to renew UNISFA mandate for 6 months and looks forward to working with other Council members on the mandate renewal. Second, cooperation between Sudan and South Sudan. Both countries need to seize the positive momentum in their bilateral relations to propel the negotiation on Abyei. We join the Secretary General in his call for the two countries to resolving the outstanding issues expeditiously, including the implementation of their 20th June 2011 agreement. Abyei's peaceful resolution is one of the test cases of political transition in Sudan and South Sudan. This also requires further effective engagement from the regional countries, the African Union, and the United Nations itself. Third, promoting intercommunal dialogue. Indonesia notes with concern the recent clashes in Abyei, most notably in Cologne. We call for an immediate joint investigation, followed with remedial actions to help the two communities heal. UNISFA's role in enhancing intercommunal dialogue in Abyei through Joint Community Peace Committee is commendable. The Traditional Leaders Conference last month was also a positive initiative. More such undertakings, topped with enhancing the rule of law, are critical for peace building. Hence, UNISFA work on capacity building for the community protection committees and its support to traditional justice mechanisms must continue. The deployment of remaining authorized additional UN police and FPUs is also of critical importance. Mr. President, let me close by reaffirming Indonesia's full support to Sudan and South Sudan in finding a peaceful solution in Abyei as part of their journey to peace. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Indonesia. Now I'll give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. I thank USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Ananga for their detailed briefings. I also welcome ambassadors from Sudan and Ethiopia. At present, the situation in the Abyei area remains generally calm and stable. The political situation in Sudan and South Sudan has witnessed positive progress. The two sides have strengthened their interaction and cooperation on Abyei and have been actively cooperating with UNISFA. Those positive developments haven't come easily, especially during COVID-19 pandemic. The Secretary General notes in his report that the Abyei area still faces many challenges and that the security situation remains fragile. The proper resolution of this issue is of vital importance to the stability of Sudan, South Sudan, and the entire region. The Security Council should continue to fully respect the leading role of the Sudan and South Sudan on Abyei issue. Listen carefully to the views of both sides. Support the efforts of regional and sub-regional organizations, such as the AU and IGAD. We hope the governments of Sudan and South Sudan will continue to seek a political solution to this issue, including the establishment of administrative, judicial, and public security institutions. The international community should provide assistance to both sides, especially on fighting COVID-19. We continue to support UNISFA in implementing its mandate. The mission has an important role in maintaining the stability of Abyei area. China welcomes the efforts of Ethiopia as one of the main troop contributing countries. We note the Secretary General's recommendations and support the extension of UNISFA's mandate. In this regard, we should listen carefully to the views of the governments of Sudan and South Sudan, AU, and troop-contributing countries. Meanwhile, we appreciate the efforts by the Secretariat to address COVID-19 pandemic and encourage to improve safety and security of peacekeepers in UNISFA. China stands ready to work with African countries and the international community to contribute to resolving the Abyei issue and promote peace, stability, and development in this region. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you to both of our briefers this morning. I'd like to start by expressing the United Kingdom's support for the peoples and the governments of Sudan and South Sudan in their efforts to respond to COVID-19. As this Council discussed on Friday in relation to Sudan, the damaging impacts of this pandemic will only add to the already significant humanitarian and socio-economic challenges faced by both countries. We welcome the quick responses of the governments of Sudan and South Sudan to COVID-19 and their efforts to mitigate its effects. So far, the UK has contributed approximately $6 million to the UN's COVID-19 preparedness and response efforts in Sudan, and over $4 million to the effort in South Sudan. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic is also taking a toll on peacekeeping missions and the brave personnel serving in them around the world. In this regard, we once again commend the Ethiopian government for its continued contributions to UNISFA. COVID-19 underlines the importance of ensuring swift medevac provision for UN personnel and the maintenance of supply chains. This is particularly the case for UNISFA, given its remoteness. Mr. President, we recognise that the COVID-19 response will dominate the agendas of the governments in Khartoum and Juba for some time, as it will for countries around the world. But we continue to urge both governments not to lose sight both of their respective peace processes and of the importance of finding a final settlement on Abyei. We welcome the progress made in South Sudan on implementation of the peace agreement with the formation of the Transitional Unity Government, and in Sudan as the civilian government continues to implement the Constitutional Declaration. And in Abyei, we welcome the efforts made by UNISFA on a range of activities, including engagement with the governments of Sudan and South Sudan, implementation of quick impact projects, mediation of local community dialogues, raising awareness of gender issues, and the removal of explosive hazards. But despite these efforts, Mr. President, we remain very concerned by the fragile security situation in Abyei. Of particular concern is the increase in intercommunal violence and attacks on mission personnel. The recent episodes of heightened tensions, increased criminality, and the presence of armed elements in UNISFA's areas of responsibility have left civilians displaced and highlighted the continued absence of law and order in Abyei. All this underlines the need for progress to be made towards a final settlement. It is a matter of deep regret that this has been lacking so far. Turning to the mission itself, Mr. President, the United Kingdom supports the Secretary-General's recommendation to extend the mandate of UNISFA for a further 6 months. The mission continues to have a vital role, not only in ensuring stability, but also in facilitating work towards a settlement of the situation in Abyei. Mr. President, this Council has long highlighted the need to boost the civilian and police components of the mission in order to contribute to this effort. We welcome the update by Under-Secretary General Lacroix on deployment of police to UNISFA, and like other Council members, hope to see further progress soon. We are disappointed by the delay in issuing visas for police and urge the government of Sudan to expedite this process. In the meantime, Mr. President, this Council should ensure that UNISFA remains adequately resourced to deliver on its mandated activities. We look forward to working with members of this Council to ensure that the mission continues to be able to maintain the stability of Abyei and to assist in the achievement of a final settlement on its status. Finally, Mr. President, regarding the two areas, we welcome the commitment of the government of Sudan and a number of armed movements to engage in peace talks aimed at achieving a comprehensive peace across Sudan. Here, we continue to urge all sides to engage constructively, immediately, and without preconditions in these negotiations to deliver a peaceful and swift solution to the conflict areas, including the two areas. Meanwhile, we also continue to urge all parties to respect international humanitarian law and allow humanitarian actors to deliver aid to those most in need without hindrance. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Niger.
Mr. President, good morning, everybody. I would like to thank the briefers. In his report dated April 16, 2020, the Secretary General drew attention to see positive momentum built between Sudan and South Sudan in their bilateral relations in order to establish progress toward resolving the border dispute over Abyei. In that regard, Niger welcomes the political progress made by both countries, including the peace-building process underway in Sudan and the establishment of the Transitional Government of National Unity of South Sudan, which was declared on February 22, 2020. This development can provide a conducive peace environment in Abyei. Mr. President, we must congratulate the United Nations Interim Security Force for Abyei, UNISFA, regarding the effort made in the prevention of intercommunity conflict, particularly through the implementation of key impact projects in order to support the local population, as well as those made to organize several peace conferences in the Abyei region. Conferences that brought together the traditional chief of the Ngok, Dinka, and Misraya. My country strongly condemned the tragic event that took place in the Kolom region in January. We are asking both parties to initiate a joint investigation and prosecute the perpetrators to justice. This will promote peace and establish agreement and harmony among the people of the two warring communities. We call upon the party to continue the process of border demarcation, focusing on bilateral political consultation leading to the establishment of a political administration. We further call upon them to consider meeting with the African Union and IGAD in order to facilitate the process of border demarcation within the framework of the joint border and make the monitoring and verification mechanism effective. In addition, we support the appointment of a civilian head of UNISFA and call upon the Abyei partner to negotiate as it is constant case for compromising solution in the border demarcation process. In conclusion, my country supports the extension of the mandate of UNISFA for 6 months and commends the mission for preventive measures in the fight against COVID-19. Given that culture of performance, we are pleased to note that the mission has appointed a COVID-19 coordinator, assisted by a working group, not only to protect personnel, but to ensure that all activity continue for the best interest of the people of Abyei. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Niger for his statement. I give the floor now to the representative from Russian Federation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me also to thank our briefers, Under Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Special Envoy Parfait Ananga Ananga for their interventions. Despite the fragility of the security situation in Abyei, peacekeeping efforts contributed to making the area more stable. We commend the activities of the United Nations Interim Security Force for Abyei in maintaining constructive relations with local communities. The measures taken by the Blue Helmets to prevent intercommunal conflicts, as well as to establish cooperation on law enforcement and economic activities in the area of ambient common markets, are also commendable. The meeting of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism that was held on February 19, as well as a Traditional Leaders Conference organized on March 16, made a clear contribution to the promotion of a much-needed dialogue among all the parties. We presume that the joint border verification and monitoring mechanism is an integral element of the system for preventing incidents between the parties. Its support from UNISFA makes a valuable contribution to stabilizing Abyei. We would like to highlight the professionalism and courage demonstrated by the Ethiopian peacekeepers who serve in one of the most difficult peacekeeping operations in the world from a logistical point of view as well. Mr. President, promotion of a long-lasting settlement between Sudan and South Sudan requires joint efforts by the parties. There is an international legal basis for this, well-known resolutions of the Security Council and the African Union, as well as a package of bilateral agreements concluded between the two countries in September 2012 in Addis Ababa. We expect the AU High-Level Implementation Panel to continue its valuable work with the Sudanese and South Sudanese parties. We note steady normalization in relations between Sudan and South Sudan. The participation of Khartoum, together with the IGAD, in the revitalization of the South Sudan peace agreement made a significant contribution to the settlement process in this country. We also highlight the mediation efforts by President Salva Kiir to accompany the negotiations between the Sudanese authorities and armed groups. The accumulated positive potential in bilateral relations should be used to resolve the Abyei issue. We understand that in the current conditions, there are objective factors that prevent Khartoum and Juba from accelerating the settlement of the final status of Abyei. In such circumstances, maintaining the presence of UNISFA is still very relevant. In this regard, we support the proposal by the Secretary General to extend the mandate of UNISFA, including its support to the JBVMM, for 6 months. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Vietnam.
I thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, allow me to thank Undersecretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix and Special Envoy Prophet Ananga for their insightful briefing. Vietnam would like to commend and express our support for the work of the UN Interim Security Force in Abyei, UNISFA, and the Special Envoy. We also welcome the participation of representatives of Sudan and Ethiopia to our meeting today. Mr. President, Vietnam is closely following the situation in Sudan and South Sudan and strongly welcome the recent progresses in both countries' political and security sphere and in the relation between them. We believe this achievement can create an important momentum for both sides to actively engage in addressing the Abyei issues. We are pleased to see that Abyei has become more stable and secure according to the latest report before us. However, the situation in Abyei still remains fragile due to increasing intercommunal violence, crimes, and the presence of armed elements. We are also concerned about the threat of COVID-19 in Abyei, as Sudan and South Sudan and many countries in the region have reported confirmed positive cases. Mr. President, I would like to emphasize the 5 following points. First, we underline the importance of a timely and appropriate solution to the issue of Abyei, which we believe is of vital importance to peace, security, and stability of Sudan, South Sudan, and the region. In this regard, we call on South Sudan and Sudan to soon resolve the issue through peaceful means, in accordance with international laws and UN Charter and the agreements of the 20th of June 2011. And at the same time, the Council should continue to take into full account the view of the two sides on the issue. Vietnam strongly welcomes the efforts of UNISFA in promoting cooperation and dialogue between Sudan and South Sudan. We acknowledge UNISFA's robust support to the joint border verification and monitoring mechanism, and note that progress has been made on the benchmark of Resolution 2497. We are also aware of the challenges posed by COVID-19 to this process and encourage UNISFA to continue to support both countries in conducting dialogue with remote means. Second, while the final solution to Abyei is still pending, it is important to ensure security and sustainable livelihood for the people in the area, given increasing impact of climate change and the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. The President of UNISFA has been essential in maintaining stability in Abyei. Vietnam calls on both governments of Sudan and South Sudan to continue to support UNISFA in carrying out its mandate, as well as to support the appointment of the civil deputy head of the mission and the establishment of Abyei Police Service, as recommended by the Secretary General. Cooperation between both governments UNISFA in combating COVID-19 should be also strengthened. Third, we highlight the role of the regional and sub-regional organizations, namely the African Union and the Intergovernmental Authority on Development, IGAD, in supporting the resolution on the Abyei issue. We also commend the role of neighboring countries, especially Ethiopia, for their vital contribution to UNISFA. Further cooperation between the UN and regional actors will provide synergies in helping Sudan and South Sudan to resolve their outstanding issues. Fourth, with regard to the mandate of UNISFA, Vietnam supports the extension of UNISFA mandate as recommended by the Secretary General in his report. We look forward to working with the Council member on the renewal of UNISFA in the coming weeks. We believe it is important to also take into consideration the views of the government of Sudan and South Sudan, of the AU, IGAD, and troop contributing countries in this matter. Fifth, we would like also to commend the strong role of women in UNISFA, which we see a strong example of female participation in UN peacekeeping. The current female ratio in UNISFA is 10.9%, much higher than the average in all missions. It is a solid foundation for UNISFA to further strengthen its activity in promoting gender equality, empowerment of women on the ground, which is already very commendable. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Vietnam for his statement. I now give the floor to the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you, Mr. President. My delegation thanks USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Ananga Anyanga for their briefings on the United Nations Interim Security Force in Abyei. St. Vincent and the Grenadines welcomes the positive political developments in both Sudan and South Sudan. We remain hopeful that this momentum will translate into greater cooperation and a renewed commitment between the two countries to find a just political resolution on the final status of Abyei. We acknowledge the progress and challenges highlighted in the Secretary General's recent report. In particular, we note the fragile security situation in Abyei, including the ongoing intercommunal violence, as was evident in the Nai column attacks on January 19th and 22nd. We condemn these attacks and lament the heightened tensions between Nok Dinga and Miseria communities. We welcome UNISFA's efforts in investigating these violent incidents and encourage the authorities to proceed with the joint investigation as agreed during the February 19th Joint Political and Security Mechanism meeting in Juba. Equally, we urge Abyei communities to exercise utmost restraint and call on the Sudan and South Sudan governments to cooperate fully with UNISFA. UNISFA's tireless efforts to ensure peace and stability in the region, including to maintain Abyei as a weapons-free zone, are laudable. We commend UNISFA for its regular constructive engagements with the administrative and traditional leaders, as well as with the Joint Community Peace Committee. We also welcome the advances within the framework of the JPSM and urge the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee to convene regular meetings. Mr. President, the difficulties in Abyei will not be resolved unless key drivers of intercommunal conflicts are robustly tackled. We therefore urge the parties to fulfill their obligations as stipulated in the 2011 agreement and the 2012 cooperation agreement. We remain concerned about the dire humanitarian situation in Abyei, which is expected to be exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Likewise, the dreadful environmental conditions in the region, which is compounded by the adverse effects of climate change, continue to negatively alter the security, economic, and political landscape. Amidst these immense challenges, we emphasize the need for unhindered humanitarian service delivery to those who require urgent assistance. My delegation encourages the inclusion of women in the decision-making process in Abyei. We welcome the work of UNISFA in support of the Women, Peace and Security mandate. We also note marginal progress in the joint border verification monitoring mechanism and some progress on the benchmarks specified by Resolution 2497 of 2019. We call on all parties to adhere to the stipulations outlined in the outcome documents of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism ordinary sessions in Juba on 13th October 2019 and 19th February 2020. UNISFA remains an interim security force, and therefore it is critical to resolve the status of Abyei. St. Vincent and the Grenadines stands in solidarity with the people of Abyei and reaffirms our commitment to UNISFA. We also thank Ethiopia for its invaluable contribution through its peacekeepers and reiterate our support for the critical mediating role played by the African Union. I thank you.
I thank the representative of St. Vincent and the Grenadines for her statement, and I give the floor to Tunisia, the representative.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank Undersecretary General for Peace Operation Jean-Pierre Lacroix and the Special Envoy Parfait Ananga Ananga for their briefings, and we welcome the participation of representatives of Sudan and Ethiopia. We express our appreciation for the stabilizing role of the UN Interim Security Force for Abyei, UNISFA, in the area and along the Sudan-South Sudan border, including its support to the joint border verification and monitoring mechanism. We would also like to commend Ethiopia and its peacekeepers for their dedicated contribution. Mr. President, ongoing political transitions in the Sudan and South Sudan represented pivotal developments over the last few months, which inspired hope in positive change and comprehensive peace. Both governments in the Sudan and South Sudan have been actively engaging with each other through reciprocal visits of their leaders and mutual support for their respective peace processes. We believe it is important for the Sudan and South Sudan and for this Council to capitalize on these positive developments so that the pursuit of just and sustainable peace in both countries extends to the Abyei area. We encourage both governments to foster rapprochement and mutual trust with a view to reaching a lasting settlement to the status of Abyei area. We urge them also to re-energize their cooperation, including with the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, to resolve the outstanding issues as outlined in the Cooperation Agreement of 2012, including. Mr. President, Tunisia notes the overall progress in the implementation of UNISFA mandate in Abyei and along the border, as outlined in the Secretary General report. We commend in particular the continuous engagement of the mission with the officials in Khartoum and Juba, as well as in the Abyei local level. However, despite the encouraging political trends, challenges remain in view of the sadly avoidable intercommunal violence, the threat of armed groups, and the omnipresence of weapons within the Abyei area. We are concerned about the escalation of attacks across intercommunal lines, the latest of which on Mabok village in southern Abyei on April the 13th. We express our support for UNISFA efforts in pushing local peace processes forward to resolve seasonal migration issues and promote intercommunal reconciliation. We also praise UNISFA and endeavor to empower women participation at local peace committees in order to enhance prospects of lasting peace. Mr. President, the spread of COVID-19 pandemic has forced a priority shift for many affected countries across the globe. We reiterate the UN Secretary General call for a global ceasefire and call on parties to exert self-restraint within the Abyei area so that the Sudan and South Sudan could focus on carrying out their challenging state-building tasks. On the way forward, for the UN presence in Abyei, we would like to endorse the recommendation of the Secretary General in his report on the extension of UNISFA mandate and its support to the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism for a further period of 6 months and remain vital for the stabilization of the Abyei area and along the border. We are of the view of UNISFA mandate needs to calibrated and contextualized to align with priority shifts and pace for the parties so as to bolster peace, security, and development endeavors and effectively counter the COVID-19 pandemic. We stand ready to engage constructively in the upcoming negotiations on further modalities of such extension. Thank you, Mr. President.
We thank the representative of Tunisia, and I now give the floor to Germany. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And let me first thank both our briefers for their very insightful remarks. And let me also welcome the presence of the ambassadors of Sudan and Ethiopia. Madam President, UNISFA is crucial for stabilizing the Abyei area as long as there is no lasting political settlement and hence no governance structure that can address the many challenges for the population arising from a lack of socio-economic development, humanitarian needs, and a rise in criminality and intercommunal violence. The mission must be adequately equipped to address these challenges. In this context, let me express our gratitude to Ethiopia for contributing high-quality peacekeepers. We agree with the Secretary General's recommendation that the mandate should be extended by 6 months. However, as we have said before, the mission must be calibrated to effectively respond to the changing realities on the ground. In our view, it is necessary that the mission has the capacity to address the rise in criminal activity, to support community-level peace processes, mediation and dialogue, and to advance its support to the African Union Commission and the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel, as well as to the two parties. To address the rise in crime rates and the securitization situation overall, we would like to underline the urgent need to strengthen the police component of the mission. And we note with great concern and disappointment that the adaptations of the mandate made by this Council have not been implemented yet. On the positive side, we would like to note that the police component consists of almost 30% of female officers. This percentage should be maintained once the enlargement of this component is finally implemented. And we would like to take this opportunity to strongly urge Sudan to issue visas without further delay, particularly to allow the mandated increase in UNISFA's police personnel, as soon as the current restrictions posed in the context of COVID-19 allow for their deployment. We also see the continued need to strengthen the civilian component of the mission in order to support the efforts of the communities in Abyei to reconcile and create enduring peaceful relations. And we particularly support particular support of initiatives for full and effective participation of women at all stages of the peace process is required. The mandate needs to ensure continued effective human rights monitoring, including of any sexual and gender-based violence and violations and abuses of human rights, including those committed against women and children. And we therefore welcome the Secretary General's recommendation to deploy more human rights expertise to UNISFA. Madam President, on the political process, Abyei needs a political solution, and both parties, the governments of Sudan and South Sudan, are in the driver's seat. That is obvious. Sustainable peace in both countries, which are so closely intertwined, cannot be achieved without a constructive solution to the Abyei question. Up to now, little progress was made by the parties on the issues of border demarcation and on the process leading to a final status of Abyei. And as we have heard from Undersecretary General Lacroix, it is highly unlikely that the final status issues will be resolved anytime soon. On the other hand, we do commend efforts by UNISFA's leadership to convene peace conferences in the Abyei area to bring together the traditional leaders of both the Ngok Dinka and the Miseria and urge the parties to support these efforts. We'd also like to further urge the parties to jointly investigate the attacks of the 19th and 22nd January that left 36 civilians dead and to jointly bring the perpetrators to justice. Such action would be a sign of responsible ownership by both parties. It is not the international community who can solve the question of Abyei. It is only the governments of Sudan and South Sudan who can do this. And we can only offer our support, but local stakeholders must not operate under the false impression that they can hide behind the international community forever. And for that reason, in that context, we encourage regional actors to actively engage the parties on the Abyei question. We would welcome more detailed reporting on the AU HIPs and the Special Envoy's engagement in the Secretary General's reports. And we need to make tangible progress. We need to have a finite timeline, and we call upon the parties to hold regular meetings of the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee and the Joint Political and Security Mechanism, and to consult on Abyei at ministerial level. To conclude, and to echo the Secretary General's appeal for a global ceasefire, we feel it is paramount that differences will need to be resolved with a view to dedicating all efforts to curbing the further spread of COVID-19. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Germany, and I now give the floor to the representative of Belgium. Belgium, you have the floor. We can hear you. I'm going to give the floor to the next speaker. The next speaker is South Africa. The representative of South Africa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President, for giving us the floor. Madam President, I would like to express my delegation's gratitude to you for convening today's meeting. I would also like to thank Mr. Lacroix as well as Special Envoy Ananga for their enlightening briefings. Permit me, Madam President, to make the following key observations on the political developments as well as the status of UNISFA. In terms of the political development, South Africa welcomes the positive developments that have taken place in both Sudan and South Sudan in the recent past, including those highlighted in the Secretary General's report of 16 October 2019 to 15 April 2020. With the positive developments that have taken place in Sudan thus far, we emphasize the continued need for unity in Sudan's ruling political coalition. We continue to urge the two countries to use the renewed reapproachment to finalize the outstanding issues with regards to Abyei. The tensions reported earlier this year highlighted the volatility of the region and its potential to unravel progress, which has been undertaken to bring stability in the area. South Africa encourages Sudan and South Sudan to continue inclusive political dialogue to implement their agreements on border issues and meet the benchmarks previously set by the Security Council. On UNISFA, the developments pertaining to UNISFA, South Africa appreciates and welcomes the importance of the stabilizing role UNISFA and the Joint Border Verification and Monitoring Mechanism, the JBVMM, continue to play along the borders between Sudan and South Sudan. South Africa welcomes the progress that has been made by the JBVMM on benchmarks specified by the Security Council Resolution 2497. Furthermore, South Africa welcomes and encourages the continued work of the Joint Political and Security Mechanism and the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee, and notes the Secretary General's call that in this time of the COVID-19 pandemic, engagement in the foreseeable future may need to take on new modalities. Madam President, my delegation is encouraged by the UNISFA facilitated meetings between the Ngok Dinka and the Miseria on 16 March and 9 April to discuss the ending of the intercommunal tensions. We welcome their renewed commitment to peace and security in Abyei. We hope that continued interactions between the two sides will lead to an agreement on resolving outstanding issues. Lastly, Madam President, South Africa welcomes the progress that UNISFA has made in promoting the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the Abyei region by promoting women's participation at all levels of decision-making, including in conflict prevention and resolution processes. We also thank Ethiopia for their continued efforts in contributing to the stabilization of security tensions in Abyei. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the representative of Estonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank the briefers. Estonia welcomes the positive developments that have taken place over the past 6 months. Allow me to express our gratitude to UNISFA and Ethiopia for their contributions. We recognize that the transitions in Sudan and South Sudan, as well as the impact of the COVID-19 crisis, require the full attention of both governments. However, we call on the parties to capitalize on their improving relationship to push for progress on the question of Abyei. Most importantly, it cannot be overemphasized that there is no substitute for a meaningful political process between the parties. The more this process is delayed, the worse the situation seems to get on the ground. The deteriorating security situation is a stark reminder of that. So is the worsening humanitarian situation. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic is only amplifying this threat. Therefore, we call on Sudan and South Sudan to revive a viable political process, which will lead to the implementation of the 2011 agreement. This could be significantly aided by the appointment of the civilian deputy head of the mission. We also encourage regional actors to actively engage the parties on the Abyei question. Yet meanwhile, it is the responsibility of this council to tackle the negative security trends decisively now. In this connection, Estonia has 3 recommendations. Firstly, in the light of increasing criminality and intercommunal violence, it is crucial to expedite the deployment of the remaining authorized UNISFA personnel, especially the police component. We recognize that COVID pandemic is causing delays, but we call for the issuance of the visas for the deployment of all UNISFA personnel without further delays. Secondly, we need to institute as much accountability as possible to bring the perpetrators of violence to justice. In this context, we call upon the authorities to launch joint investigations into the deadly incidents in Colom in January. Accountability will not only deter future incidents, but will also help to build much-needed trust between communities. Thirdly, we need to deploy human rights expertise to UNISFA. This will help to strengthen the capacity of the local authorities to address human rights abuses and therefore prevent further violence. Estonia supports the Secretary General's recommendation to extend the mandate of UNISFA for the next 6 months. However, the parties must show their willingness to make progress toward resolving the Abyei question. Mr. President, to conclude, we commend the encouraging signs of progress made recently, but we also call on the parties to urgently build on the positive momentum, especially with a meaningful political process towards a final resolution of the Abyei question. Further delays will only continue to prolong the plight of Abyei people. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Estonia for his statement. I give now the floor to the representative of Belgium.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Hi, how are you?
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me thank, of course, the briefers, USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Parfait Ananga, for their very insightful remarks. As always, a discussion on Abyei cannot take place without referring to developments both in Sudan and in South Sudan. The transitions happening in both countries can positively influence efforts to solve the question of Abyei. We welcome positive steps taken in the past months. We understand also that these transitions, alongside with dealing with the human and economic impact of the COVID-19 crisis, require the full attention of both governments. We urge them, however, to keep the matter on their agenda in order to reach a final settlement on the status of Abyei. Both governments' full and entire commitment is required to reach sustainable peace in the area. This includes creating the conditions for UNISFA to carry out its mandate. We note that the security situation remains fragile, with some tragic outbursts of violence. We call on the parties to bring the perpetrators to justice. We agree with the Secretary General that UNISFA continues to play a crucial role to curb violence and increasing crime and to protect civilians, including through the mitigation of intercommunity tensions. We also welcome UNISFA's efforts to foster peace, dialogue, and conflict resolution, including by supporting the African Union High-Level Implementation Panel. Mr. President, UNISFA cannot be an open-ended substitute for normal administrative and public services which the population of Abyei is entitled to receive. This is why a solution through political dialogue is needed. We call on parties to remain engaged to that end and seize the momentum of transition. Pending a final settlement on the status of Abyei, a responsible exit of the mission is difficult to envisage. Finally, previous resolutions must be implemented, in particular by appointing a civilian deputy head of mission and by increasing the police component of this mission. We look forward to more progress in this regard. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank the representative of Belgium for her statement. Somebody has their mic open. Please check and close the mic. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as a representative of the Dominican Republic. We thank USG Lacroix and Special Envoy Ananga for their briefings. This reporting period has been marked by positive steps that have been influenced by the peaceful transitions in both countries. Nevertheless, the recent violent attacks that have taken place in Abyei, which resulted in deaths, kidnappings, and burned down villages, in addition to other fatalities, are highly concerning. Due to this insecurity, humanitarian agencies have been unable to implement aid projects in some territories. This very fragile situation is exacerbated by the current armed attacks, the effects of climate change, and now the threat of COVID-19 pandemic, which requires united efforts in order to hold back its spread. Since this conflict started, Sudan and South Sudan, as they face other pressing issues, have paid limited attention to their responsibilities regarding Abyei. More needs to be done that would allow for the consolidation of peace and security by fostering a viable political process that ultimately leads to the full implementation of the 2011 agreements. In this sense, it is also critical that UNISFA is equipped with an appropriate mandate, capabilities, and assets. The appointment of a civilian deputy head of mission and other key civilian and police staff, as well as the operationalization of Anthony Strip, will be a great boost to this end. We welcome the progress made on the deployment of the joint military observer teams through the Abyei area and the advances of the implementation of benchmarks of the joint border verification and monitoring mechanism. The people of Abyei expect solutions to their priority needs, including health, nutrition, food and water, as well as protection of their human rights. It is concerning that cases of sexual and gender-based violence involving minors are being reported and that women in the Abyei area lack representation in the decision-making process. In this regard, we welcome the reappointment of a female representative of the Ngok Dinka Joint Community Peace Committee and the ongoing drafting of an action plan to promote coherent implementation of the WPS agenda. To conclude, we would also like to highlight the initiative to convene a traditional leaders conference on April 9, 2020, as well as the vast comprehensive advocacy focus on protecting human rights, especially those of women and children. In order to get sustainable peace, it is necessary that Sudan and South Sudan take concrete action to fulfill their commitments and that this Council refocus its attention to this issue. The upcoming discussions on UNISFA's mandate presents us with a perfect opportunity to do so. Thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. And now I give the floor to the representative of Sudan.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, let me begin by thanking Under-Secretary General for Peace Operations, Mr. Jean-Pierre Lacroix, for his briefing. Also want to thank the Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa and the members of the Security Council for expressing their support to my government in the face of the outbreak of COVID-19. Mr. President, it is my duty also to thank sisterly Ethiopia for offering peace builders and peacekeepers in Abyei area deployed under the UNISFA. Mr. President, my government welcomes the recommendation of the Secretary General to extend the mandate for UNISFA for 6 months. Mr. President, while taking note of the report of the Secretary General issued in document S/2020/308 on the progress in implementation of the mandate of the United Nations Interim Force in Abyei, UNISFA, I would like in this regard to emphasize the following points. Number one, we commend UNISFA's leadership and personnel for their efforts towards preserving peace and stability in Abyei. I seize this opportunity to assure the Security Council of my government's support for the mission in order to carry out its mandate and functions in an effectively and efficient manner. Number two, Sudan reaffirms its commitment to all arrangements signed with the Republic of South Sudan and their terms of reference, foremost of which is the agreement on temporary arrangements for the administration and security in Abyei area, which was signed in June 20th, 2011, and the cooperation agreement between Sudan and South Sudan of September 27th, 2012. It is to be noted that the agreement of 20th June 2011 remains the major basis for negotiations on the final status of Abyei. Number three, Mr. President, following the meeting last January between the President of South Sudan and the Deputy Chairperson of the Sovereign Council in the Sudan, the two countries agreed to establish a joint mechanism to protect civilians in Abyei. A couple of weeks later, the Joint Security and Political Committee, which comprises high-level representatives from both countries, Sudan and South Sudan, which met in Juba and briefed by the UNISFA's force commander, the Joint Committee reached a set of arrangements aimed at avoiding any relapse or escalation between the communities. The committee also agreed to refer to the leadership of the two countries the following issues. Number one, the increase of the number of joint police forces. B, the appointment of a civilian deputy head of the mission. And number C, the utilization and usage of Antony Airport. Number four, Mr. President, the Joint Committee was supposed to have held a follow-on meeting in Khartoum in April 13th, but it was postponed due to the outbreak of COVID-19. Number 5, Mr. President, in conclusion, the new political dispensation in Sudan offers a major positive paradigm shift in the relations between the two brotherly countries, Sudan and South Sudan. Building on that, as well as on the constructive outcome of the aforementioned meetings of the Joint Security and Political Committee, the two neighboring countries will be able to prevent escalations, resolve any communal clashes in the area, and reach lasting and amicable solution on the final status of Abyei according to agreed terms. And I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative. I will now give the floor to the representative of Ethiopia. Yes, please.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Proceed, please. Thank you.
Mr. President, at the outset, I wish to congratulate you on a successful presidency of the Council. Despite the difficulties caused by COVID pandemics, we thank Under-Secretary General Jean-Pierre Lacroix for his comprehensive briefing. Our thanks also goes to Special Envoy Perfia Ananga, and also my brother from Sudan, Ambassador Omar Mohammed. Mr. President, following issuance of the Security Council Resolution 2497-2019, my government continued to meet its commitments to the deployment and mandate delivery of UNISFA. The new political dynamics in the Sudan and South Sudan have created encouraging atmosphere for all of us. Ethiopia greatly appreciates the two governments for their continued support to UNISFA's leadership and peacekeeping forces. The mission faced serious difficulties over the past 1 year, especially after the two unfortunate helicopter accidents in 2019 and the subsequent suspension of their operation by the UN Secretariat. This has significantly constrained its air operation capability. I want, therefore, to draw to the attention of the Council to the fact that our contingents are often exposed and overstretched in their efforts to cover a vast territory, including in the context of the work of the GBVMM. Mr. President, review of the concept operations in the dry season and increasing foot and mobile patrols alone cannot prevent threats or secure every inch of the area. Furthermore, we are extremely concerned that armed groups and individuals continue to present in the weapons-free zone. The security situation continues to suffer from failure to halt incidents of murder, livestock rustling, and inter-community clashes. The lack of respect and serious observance of the weapon-free zone provision is becoming dangerous, especially in the volatile migration seasons. Mr. President, we are indeed encouraged by the political will and support of the leadership of the two countries. The Abyei Joint Oversight Committee, the Joint Military Observer Teams, and the Joint Community Peace Committee are also showing progress in their respective tasks. However, more needs to be done to ensure for the success of UNISFA and its continued ability to fulfill this heavy responsibility. In this regard, more concrete actions by the government of Sudan and South Sudan, as well as the United Nations and the African Union, is needed to expedite the solution to the final status of the Abyei. Mr. President, to put it in perspective, UNISFA was facing security challenges 1 month after the adoption of the current mandate. Troops being subjected to active fire, including by well-armed groups. The challenge was further aggravated by the more volatile in the Abyei box. Incidents on the 19th and 22nd January 2020, as stated in the Secretary General report, have regrettably claimed 36 lives. Following the column incident, UNISFA was encouraged to rigorously conduct wider discussions and engagement with the Dinka and Syria communities with the objective of curbing the escalation of violence. Late in April 2020, UNISFA forces were engaged in ambush attacks and armed assault incidents in Nainai and Alal, where two assailants lost their lives. The troops exercised mandated rules of engagement in self-defense. Again, on the 24th of April 2020, 3 armed Syria men riding a tricycle opened fire at the Alal UNISFA team operation base. In response to the seemingly connected incidents, UNISFA has intensified ground patrols, including search and recovery operations in Kolma and Yora bridge areas. It is extremely worrying that the mission has so far recovered 27 assault rifles, 48 magazines, and 1,200 rounds of ammunition and 7 warlike equipment kits. UNISFA troops remain on high alert in anticipation of additional attacks. The mandated protection of the Abyei area from aggressive armed attacks and different forms of criminality is becoming a daunting task, and it requires organized response by the mission, the host countries, and the United Nations. Ethiopia recognizes the importance of strict compliance with international humanitarian law by all parties. We uphold the role of the monitoring and reporting mechanism in tracking grave violation against women and children in the context of UNISFA's mandate and pledge our full support. In the same vein, authorities, including the Abyei Joint Oversight Committee, must intensify its outreach to the communities in Abyei and assist UNISFA in ensuring that the box remains a weapon-free zone as required by the United Nations Security Council. Mr. President, in view of the above, I wish to highlight the following 4 critical measures that are instrumental to the mandate delivery of the mission. First, UNISFA facilitated meetings between the Nigonko Dinka and Syria leaders in Diffara should be complemented by the maintaining momentum on the discussion to reach an agreement on the final status of Abyei and resolve the stalled southernward movement of herders. This will help in easing the current high-level tension. Second, the troop cuts in favor of planned deployment of 3 formed police units is impacting capabilities of UNISFA. Its forces are overstretched, especially in light of the increase in criminality. In this regard, we wish to emphasize the need to suspend the withdrawal of the additional 295 troops scheduled for 15 May 2020 until restrictions resulting from the COVID pandemic are lifted and FPU replacements are on the ground to assume the security responsibility. We expect that UNISFA will be adequately resourced, including for preventive measures and preparedness against COVID-19, and the desperately needed funds for quick impact projects. Alleviating the situation of arrears in this regard remains not only a matter of principle, but also a moral obligation. Third, we trust that all relevant authorities will be continuously consulted regarding the decision of the Council on the appointment of a civilian deputy head of mission and the operationalization of the Antony airstrip, the latter being very important to improve UNISFA's medical evacuation capability, particularly in this difficult time of global pandemic. Fourth, it is important that the tragic events in the Kolom area and several other criminal cases being jointly investigated to bring perpetrators to justice. This will not only help with remedial action, but it will also contribute to trust and confidence building measures among the two communities to ensure long-term interdependence and fraternity. Finally, Mr. President, I would like to conclude by reiterating the firm commitment of the government of Ethiopia to ensure that UNISFA succeeds in its mandate delivery. In this regard, we will further strengthen our close coordination with the governments of the Sudan and South Sudan, as well as with the United Nations. I thank you, Mr. President.
The representative of Ethiopia for his statement. Since there are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers, the meeting is adjourned. So this concludes the live broadcast of this meeting.